Welcome to another audio-only podcast. I am Zen Watercooler. The channel is Zen Watercooler. I'm fighting a tiny bit of a cold today, so if I sound a bit strange, please do not adjust your dial. But I'm coming to you fighting through it because I want to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, and it's funny design, sense of humor designs. And I love this topic, and so this might be a little bit longer podcast than normal because you can't shut me up about it. I really consider myself print-on-demand expert in the sense that I've made some sales over the years, but I do consider myself always learning, humble, trying to grow. So it's in that spirit that I'm going to be talking about humor today. I know the risk that I take when I start talking about funny designs. People are going to start rolling their eyes thinking, oh, this guy thinks he's the funniest person on the planet and he's going to tell me what's funny. No, I'm not going to do that. I am not that dumb. At least I hope I'm not. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk about print-on-demand designs, specifically in the humor genre, and how you can make sales. The reason for this, the impetus for this episode, is that I get questions from time to time from people who are trying to sell designs, and they might be struggling or they might be trying to grow their business, and they say to me, Zen, I'm just not creative. I can't come up with designs. I see the designs. I like the designs. I'm on Etsy. I'm on Redbubble. I'm on TeePublic. And I just struggle. I look at them and I think, how are they coming up with all of these variants and all of these hilarious designs? Where do you get your ideas? So I am going to share with you my formula that I use. And I'm not suggesting that if you use this formula, you're going to become some comedic genius. But what I'd like to do, the purpose of this podcast today, is that we can take a stab at trying to determine what patterns there are, what similarities there are, what commonalities there are with sense of humor designs. Now, as we jump into the topic here, I do want to point out a quick little disclaimer. I may be talking about things that are a little bit inappropriate if you were to have family dinner with grandma and she's sitting there reading the Bible in between the first and the second course. Some of these topics are going to be a little bit racy. They might involve people's genitalia. They might involve sexual themes. They might involve profanity. So I'm not going to be unnecessarily rude in this podcast. I am a professional, and I don't think there's any value for me to describe some sort of ridiculous design that's sitting on Etsy or Redbubble. But I did want to point out, though, there is value in selling what I call naughty designs, okay? So these would be things like a Valentine's Day card that has a sexual implication, or it could be a t-shirt design that's sort of rude, might even have some profanity on it. And so, there's a great example on Etsy, for example. There's a candle, and it says, this is my last F word, and it's on fire, because you would light a candle, right? So it's those sort of things that appeal to people. Not all people, of course, but a lot of Etsy sales or a lot of Redbubble sales are rude designs, funny designs, inappropriate designs. And I want to give you a quick story on why this would be the case. And it's not necessarily a rude example, but I think the lack of rudeness in this example just highlights why it's a fundamental need to give a gift or to buy something that's unique. So I have a sister, and she has a birthday every year at the same time. Imagine that. And so I was buying her a birthday gift, and I thought, I know she likes candy, and maybe I'll go out and I'll buy her like a couple chocolate bars. Well, when you think about that, that's a pretty lame gift, right? There's not a lot of thought put into it. So what I did instead is I went to a store that sells candy in bulk. It's called Bulk Barn. I live in Canada, so there's this big chain of stores called Bulk Barn. It's basically a warehouse, and you can go in and you can buy all sorts of different candies. You scoop them into a bag. And then I bought a huge mason jar. It was like a 5-liter mason jar. And I stuffed all the candies in there. And then in the middle of the jar, I stuck a big Toblerone chocolate bar in the middle. So as I'm saying this, I'm hoping if you were listening to this thinking, wow, if I received that, that'd be a pretty cool gift. But let's ask ourselves, why would it be cool? It's the same candy that you can just buy at a store. What's the appeal for that sort of a gift? And I think the answer is because it shows a uniqueness to the gift. And that translates into thought. It translates into effort. So when we see a design, a print-on-demand design, or when we see a unique gift on Etsy, it could be a gift box, a candle. When you're on Redbubble and you see a unique t-shirt, there's an inherent sense that there's more effort put into it. Now, it may not be necessarily true because it takes the same amount of effort to create a funny design as it does to create a not funny design, but there's something in our brain that sees a funny design and says, oh, there's an extra piece there, there's a little spark there, and it makes people laugh, it makes people smile. So there's a sense of ownership when you have something funny, even if you didn't create it yourself. So I'm thinking from the customer's perspective. If they wear a funny shirt, somebody might say, wow, Brian's really funny because he's wearing this funny shirt. Well, Brian didn't create the shirt, but Brian bought the shirt. So he can have some sense of ownership over it. So why do we care? Some people are not naturally funny. Some people are really introverted and shy. So this podcast is for you. And of course, if you just enjoy listening to someone just ramble on about sense of humor and funny designs, of course, this will be helpful as well. I think there's a lot of people out there that enjoy humor. They like funny movies, they like funny designs, but they're not necessarily funny themselves. And that can present a challenge when you're trying to come up with funny designs. So the pain point that I'm going to try to crack open here in this podcast is that when you're seeing designs, you might not understand the commonality with these funny designs. You might not understand how these designs are being created. So I'm going to jump in here and try to talk a little bit about that. Now, as we jump in, I do want to point out there are detractors from this method. So if I get, hate mail, or if people are listening to this thing, I don't necessarily agree, I totally get it. So I'm going to make a case here for it over the next minute or so. The detractors will say something like, funny is just funny, and you can't really explain it. Okay, I happen to disagree. I'm hardwired to be highly analytical, and so what that means is I see patterns in the world, or I try to see patterns in the world, and I try to break down the rules of the game, whatever it is. It could be the rules at work, the rules in print on demand, whatever it is. So I am going to attempt to explain why a design is funny, and I know I take great risk in doing this of offending people who do have a sense of humor, so I don't want you to think I'm talking down to anyone. This is more designed for people that are truly confused about why something is funny. They know it's funny, but they're like, is there something going on in my brain? Am I being tricked here? Like, what's the reason that I'm enjoying this design so much? Another argument is that people will sometimes say, well, funny isn't really high art. And I can understand this premise. I can understand this argument because, you're looking at a candle on Etsy that says, light, boyfriend, gift for boyfriend, light this candle when you fart. And you're going, well, am I really proud to sell this in my store? I personally am. I have no problem selling rude designs, funny designs, designs with swearing on them, because my attitude is the customer deserves what they want. So if the customer really wants to buy a fart candle and stick it in the bathroom and make their guests laugh when they come over, I don't have a problem with it. So to me, there's really no difference between high art and just art. And yes, of course, I understand Michelangelo's David is a whole lot different than an Etsy fart candle. I'm not a complete moron. But I will say, from a perspective of the customer in print on demand, I'm not a super snob where I look at low-end designs that are just funny text or they're rude text. I don't look at those as any less than a really masterful piece of art that's sitting on a t-shirt. So the argument that funny is gross or disgusting, I think that can be true for some people. Look, if I'm out at the mall and I'm with, a small child and someone walks by with a huge penis t-shirt, am I going to laugh? Yeah, I think it's probably pretty funny. Am I going to wear it myself? No, I think it's completely inappropriate to wear in a public setting. However, there are designs that are specific for, say, bachelor parties or bachelorette parties. They're sometimes known as gag gifts. So, for example, if you've got a friend who's turning 50 and, some people would think that that's old. I don't personally think that's old, but some people would think that's old. So you come up with I'm an old bag, on the t-shirt and you give it to, the lady that's 50 years old. Well, she might find it hilarious. I don't know that she's necessarily going to wear it to a job interview, but the idea is that you could wear it around the house and have some fun, or you just wear it for the evening and maybe you just throw it in the garbage. I know that's kind of a waste, but that's the whole idea of a gag gift, is it's not meant to be this permanent heirloom that sits inside of your family's estate for millennia. Okay, so let's take a look here at what makes something funny. I'm sure you've gone through Redbubble or TeePublic, merch by Amazon, Displate, whatever it is, and if you've seen a funny design, you might think, wow, that's great. But let's really break it down and figure out why something is funny. There's a number of different reasons I want to point out, and And I think one of the reasons why there's so many different funnies out there is that there's just so many different people. So if you Google funny t-shirts and you look at all the designs, there will be a lot of designs that you don't personally find funny. So I'm not making the claim that if something that I am about to say is funny, you must find it funny. I'm saying there's people out there that would find it funny. I'll give you just a quick example. If you're watching a YouTube video of a guy falling on a sidewalk, maybe it's icy or he slips and he falls, there are people in the world that find that really funny and they're just uncontrollably laughing. And there's also people who are not finding this funny at all. Maybe they have high empathy and they're like, oh, this poor gentleman is hurt his vertebrae. This is not funny at all. And so I don't think either one of those types of people is wrong necessarily. I'm not making a moral argument. I'm just saying if your brain finds it funny, your brain finds it funny. You can't really help it. Yes, you could train yourself and meditate and eventually float on a cloud and claim yourself morally superior, and you're not going to laugh at the guy getting kicked in the nuts. But to me, if you're going to find it funny, you're going to find it funny. So to me, that's sort of just a hard wiring in someone's brain. So what makes something funny to at least some people? Well, one way is to simply provide something that's rude on a t-shirt or something that's true, but you wouldn't normally say it in mixed public. So if imagine if you were in a job interview and then you made some sort of inappropriate comment. It wouldn't be funny if it happened to you in real life, but if you were watching a TV show and it happened, it would be funny. So somebody, for example, let's say just as an example, you had a t-shirt on and it says, I'm naked under these clothes. Okay, well, some people would find that funny. And the reason some people would find it funny is because you would never go to a job interview and say that to the person that's interviewing you. Hi, my name's Zen Watercooler. I'm here for the accounting position. By the way, I'm naked under all these clothes. They'd be like, get out of here. We're going to phone security, right? Of course, that would be outrageous. The whole point of it being funny is that it's not appropriate. So if you're wondering how to make funny designs, a really easy way is just to come up with things that you would say maybe in private to your friends, but you wouldn't say in a public setting. Just write them down and then just imagine them on a t-shirt. And all of a sudden your brain might think, actually, that's pretty funny because I wouldn't normally say that. Another reason that people find designs funny is that there's things in our society that are forbidden or taboo to talk about. And I'll just give you a couple here. One would be sex. Another one would be farting or some sort of bodily fluids, peeing your pants, for example. Even as I say this, there's a tendency for people to start giggling. Like if I just started talking for the next 5 minutes about peeing your pants, eventually you'd be like, okay, like enough. This is getting out of hand because it's so taboo to talk about. And it's obviously really a sad situation if somebody has like a medical condition where they can't control themselves. So I'm not making fun of anybody that can't actually control their bowels. But I'm just saying there's all sorts of movie and TV tropes where the poor gentleman's on an airplane and he craps his pants. And it's really unfortunate, but we're laughing at someone else's misfortune. That's the whole point of a humor movie. And again, there's people wired this way and there's people that are not wired this way. There's also things like being crazy or unpredictable. Now, I don't mean being crazy in the sense that someone has a medical condition where they have, like, say, schizophrenia. I'm talking about someone who just has no filter, like no social filter. So they walk around going like, I'm crazy. There's Crazy Jim. He's very unpredictable. And then, of course, rude designs as well. So the whole idea is that these are forbidden and taboo topics to talk about. And so if you can stick them on a t-shirt in some regard, it can be really appealing. So there's also innuendo that you can do. And I think this is really valuable in the print-on-demand world, is you can make a claim on a t-shirt, but you don't necessarily have to explicitly make that claim. So I'll give you an example. So I live in Canada, and one of the provinces in Canada is this province called Alberta. And Alberta has a lot of cows, and they produce a lot of beef. It's a big farming community, big province where they create a lot of beef. So there's a phrase called Alberta beef, and it's just sort of a brand that Alberta uses when they're marketing their meat, especially like overseas. So it was kind of funny. I was in Europe once a couple years ago at a restaurant, and they were very proud to sell Alberta beef. And I thought, good Lord, I've traveled halfway around the world to Europe, and here I am sitting, eating Alberta beef at a restaurant in Europe. I thought that was pretty funny. So the t-shirt design would be something like Alberta beef, and then a big arrow pointed down at your groin. And it would be like, ay, 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 right? I mean, obviously that's not high art. I don't make the claim that it is. But the innuendo, of course, is that the Alberta beef is at somebody's genitals, right? But it's not saying that, though. There's just an arrow pointing down. Well, are they pointing at their shoes, Your Honor? I mean, maybe I'm completely innocent on this one. Of course not. They're pointing right at their groin, and that's the innuendo on a T-shirt. So you can have all sorts of designs like that where you can mention something, but it's albeit indirectly. Another thing you can do is you can make something funny by having something surprising on the T-shirt. So an example of this would be, there's a big popular T-shirt. It's been around forever, and if you've ever been to Mexico, I'm sure you've seen it at the market. It says 1 tequila, 2 tequila, 3 tequila, floor. So that's the surprise element on the T-shirt, is the last line of the T-shirt says floor instead of four. And of course, at the risk of completely mansplaining this joke into the grave, the idea is after you have 3 tequilas, you're so loopy you're going to fall on the floor. So the idea of the surprise of the fourth line is what tricks our brain into thinking it's funny. If it was just 1 tequila, 2 tequila, 3 tequila, I pass out, well, that wouldn't be necessarily funny. It would be true for me, but it wouldn't necessarily be funny because there's no element of surprise to it. It's the floor sounding like 4. Your brain thinks it's going to 4, and instead it goes to floor. So another thing would be like a funny rhythm or rhyming. So I'll give you an example of like a pretty easy way you can make a funny shirt with a rhyme. So for example, you could have something that says wakey wakey, eggs and bakey, or what's the plan, Stan? You can have crisscross applesauce. I mean, these are not necessarily, hugely hilarious, but the idea is they trick the brain into thinking they're fun and playful. Something like okie dokie artichoke would be an example where you'd have like a little cute kawaii artichoke. And it's funny, but it's in no way offensive. It's in no way rude. So this would be something that, let's say grandma's trying to eat healthy and she's eating a lot of, like, say, artichokes or something, right? Well, you'd buy her a T-shirt that says okie dokie artichoke, and she's like, oh, I get to feel a bit fun and playful without wearing like a penis on my shirt. I don't think grandma needs to be rocking out a big dong on the front of her, shirt when she's trying to maybe, sit at the bridge club or something, right? So that would be an example of where you can have a rhyming design that's not necessarily rude. It doesn't always have to be rude. I want to be clear about that. You can also try something that's funny, right? So the 1 tequila, 2 tequila, 3 tequila floor has a funny rhythm to it. It gets the brain moving forward. So there's often a thing called a rule of 3 in comedy. And the third thing is the wrong thing. It's the funny thing. So I'll just give you a quick example of that. So for example, if you had a food-based T-shirt, you could say something like, I enjoy spaghetti, meatballs, and sarcasm. Well, the reason the third one's funny is because it doesn't match the first 2. So it's tricking the brain into, going in one direction and then ripping it out and moving it into another direction. So another reason that things can be funny is something can be absurd. So it doesn't have to be words. So a lot of these examples that I'm showing off have words in it. But you can also have funny designs that just don't have any words at all. So for example, I was out for dinner with a buddy of mine and I made a shirt. You might have even seen the video, it's on my channel, but it has a cat and the cat's wearing headphones and it's just a black T-shirt or a gray T-shirt. I've actually got 2. And it's just a picture of a cat with headphones. I don't particularly find it hilarious, although I find it a really cute and engaging design. So I made it. I like cats. I like music. I just think it's a cool looking design. Anyway, I was out for dinner and I had my T-shirt on. It's a pretty casual dinner. I want to be clear. I'm not out at some 5-star restaurant wearing a cat T-shirt with headphones on it. But anyway, my buddy saw it. I took off my jacket and he says, wow, that's a hilarious shirt. And I was like, oh. And he started laughing uncontrollably. He just loved the shirt. He was like, wow, where did you get that? I need to get one. And so I explained how I make T-shirts and that sort of thing. But it just surprised me because I didn't think it was inherently a funny design. But I think the idea of the headphones on the cat tricked his brain because it wasn't something that he expected. Although it was something I expected because I designed the shirt. So that's another thing, is a design you see may be funnier than a design you create. And we can see this all the time when we watch stand-up comedy. Somebody delivering the joke has written the joke. So they won't be laughing at their own joke because they've already heard it a number of times, plus they created it themselves. But if you're hearing the joke for the first time, it's really funny. So that's one of those things where the brain, the element of surprise really comes in. Another way you can make a design funny is to present something that's out of the ordinary. There's a disconnect between, for example, an image and the text. It's the disconnect that's funny. So if you're into using a lot of images for your t-shirts and you like putting text either at the top of the design or the bottom of the design, here's just a quick example. You could have a really sinister looking picture. So for example, maybe the Grim Reaper, or you could have a devil on a motorcycle, or you could have some sort of really scary looking apparition, a ghost or a monster. And then underneath that, you put Mondays, am I right? And then question mark. So it's the disconnect between the two that's funny, because if you've got a picture of Satan with flames coming up, but then you're just going, yeah, it's Mondays, and I mean, we've all been there. Like, that's another one you can say, we've all been there. So you have like an absurd situation. Maybe you have a photograph of the guy getting hit in the stomach with the cannonball. It's a really famous, like, old-timey photo. And then you just write underneath, we've all been there. Because the irony is we haven't all been there, so that's why it makes it funny, because you're making a claim on something that's obviously not true. Another reason that a t-shirt design or a print-on-demand design can be funny is a shared experience. So you could have something that everybody kind of intuitively knows is true, but you don't necessarily come out and say it all the time. So and a great example would be, and I've made this t-shirt in the past and sold it, is a picture of a spatula, just a very simple SVG, silhouette. And then at the top it says spatula, and at the bottom it says survivor. So I don't say that kids are getting beat with spatulas by their parents, but by wearing that shirt, people are acknowledging an entire generation of people in the 70s and 80s that grew up under the threat of violence from their parents. Now, again, I'm not claiming that beating your child is in any way funny, but I can claim that my mom finds us hilarious, because we always joke whenever we're at a family event. My sister, the one with the candy, not that she carries it around with her, but the sister that I bought the candy for, we will sit there and sometimes tease my mom that, oh my God, our childhoods were so awful because she beat us with a spatula. But it wasn't true. So the idea that we would wear a t-shirt saying spatula survivor, she would find it funny, but it's only funny to a select group of people. I personally find it hilarious. Okay, so having that shared experience can be a really neat way to bond people through print-on-demand designs. Another one that I've seen, I didn't create it, but I thought it was pretty funny, is there's a picture of like an angel or some sort of biblical situation. It could be a statue of an angel, and then it says, thou shalt not try me. And then it says 24:7. So it looks like a Bible verse, the way it's written, thou shalt not. But it's really a t-shirt for a mom saying, get off my nerves because my kids are always, bugging me. And so 24/7, of course, means all day long, all week long. So that's a really witty design, because people are thinking at first glance it looks like a Bible design, and yet it turns out to be, hey, my kid's just an idiot and he's bugging me all day long. So that could be another funny one for a mom as well. So I've got some tips here for funny design. So if you're brand new, if you're really struggling with coming up with stuff, here's some ways you can put some verbs in your sentences so that you can really hit the ground running and have a fighting chance of making some designs that are actually funny for at least somebody. So what I would recommend is just literally Google funny t-shirt designs and then spend an hour just looking through them and just see what you like. So look at existing designs and then ask yourself, can you change a minor detail about the design? Now, I know as soon as I say this, people get outraged. They grab their pitchforks and they start saying, oh, you're just encouraging people to flood the market with just minor variations of designs, and it's people like you that deserve to be tarred and feathered. I'm not suggesting that you rip off somebody's design and that you just steal it. But what I'm suggesting is there a way that you can make it different? And I'll give you a quick example. Right? So in the example I just gave, there was an angel, so it looked kind of biblical, and it said, thou shalt not try me 24/7. Well, you could change the text on something like that and change the design so that it meets a different preference. Maybe there's people that want a more cartoony looking design. So instead of thou shalt not try me, you could write thou shalt not try the dad, or dad, or the father, or the mother. There's different phrases you could use. And then you could have completely different font, completely different color, and completely different images. I would contend, and I would stand by my contention, that that's not the same thing. Somebody buying a black t-shirt with an angel and sans serif font is not the same as someone buying a red t-shirt with a completely different design, the word father on it, and a completely different font like Futura. That's a completely different design. Although the subject matter is similar, the design itself is completely different. And I think that would be an easy way to sort of ease yourself into this market without feeling an overwhelming pressure to be completely original. So scaling up the design, I think, is another way, or a similar way, that you can make this work. So for example, I've seen this design online, and I think it's really funny. I live in Canada, and almost all of the cities are very cold in the winter. We don't have a tropical climate in Canada at all. So it's funny if you have a t-shirt that has palm trees on it and a beach and sunglasses, and it says, "Welcome to Winnipeg." And it's like, well, everybody who lives in Winnipeg and commutes to Winnipeg, they know there's no palm trees in Winnipeg. It's minus 1,000 during the winter. It's horrific. So that's kind of funny because it's so obviously not true. So if you were in Mexico, for example, and you had this t-shirt on, "Welcome to Toronto," and it had a palm tree, it would be funny to a certain segment of the population. So like that's an idea. You could scale up the design because you could just use all cold climate cities, but use a tropical design. It's the disconnect between the two that would make it funny. Now there's another way you can make funny designs, and it's simply to just be rude. Now I want to be very clear as I make this claim. I'm not suggesting that you be mean. There's a difference between being rude and being mean, in my opinion. Being mean is when you're targeting a certain group of people or someone specific and you're putting them down. I'm not suggesting that. I'm talking about being rude. And being rude is being politically or socially deviant. You're saying and doing something that's not normally accepted in the norms of society. So an example would be like that, writing, I'm naked under these clothes. Well, you're not putting anyone down. You're not being mean. You're just simply making a claim that's completely inappropriate to say in terms of mixed company. Okay, another one that I really like, it's a t-shirt and it says on the top, "Are you childish or are you immature?" And then there's a yes box and a no box, like you're supposed to check one of the boxes. But in the no box, they've drawn a penis. Like it's a hand-drawn, crudely drawn wiener. And it's like, oh. So, I mean, obviously that is childish and that is immature. So like the idea is they put it into the no box. That's why it's funny. If they put it in the yes box, it wouldn't be funny because, yes, they're admitting they're childish. The whole disconnect is I'm saying I'm not childish, and meanwhile I drew a dong in the no box. That's kind of funny, right? Because it tricks your brain into thinking one thing in a half second, and then it flips it and goes, oh, that's actually pretty funny. Another way you can make some pretty easy, funny designs is to simply say something honest on the shirt that you wouldn't normally say. So it doesn't necessarily have to be inappropriate, but it has to be truthful. Now, I do think this is inappropriate, but the t-shirt would say something like, "I pooped today," and then a big smiley face or a person with his hands over his head like he's celebrating, like a touchdown. So you wouldn't normally go into mixed public and say, "Hey, I just, went to the bathroom." But the idea that we've all been constipated or we've all had diarrhea or we've all had some sort of, minor medical malady where it's like, oh, we don't feel so good today, I feel bloated. Well, it's the acknowledgement of that shared experience on the t-shirt that is funny. Another one you could do, here's another example. The t-shirt says, "If my mouth doesn't say it, my face definitely will." And I love this one because I tend to have what they call sour expression or resting bee face. So to me, that's kind of funny because if I'm not impressed by something, I don't do a very good job of hiding it. I think a lot of people can relate to this. So it's the shared experience and the inappropriateness, because you wouldn't just come out into a job interview and say, "By the way, if I'm not happy with something, you'll know it because of my face." They'd be like, "Get out of here," right? So it's kind of funny in that regard. Another one that's, again, not mean at all, but it's acting a bit immature or acting a bit selfish. So an example would be a t-shirt that says something like, "No snacks, I'm out," and then the person just walking away. It's like a tiny silhouette of a person walking away. And so the idea here is that it's all about you. If there's no food, or if it's not your favorite food, you could say no pizza, I'm out. No spaghetti, I'm out. No cats, I'm out. Not that you're eating cats, but it doesn't have to be about food. It could just be whatever you're interested in. If it's not there, you're leaving. It's funny because you probably wouldn't do this in real life. If we were hanging out and I said, hey, sorry, there's no chicken wings on the menu, and you flipped the table over and stormed out, that wouldn't necessarily be very funny. But of course, it's the exaggeration that you're going to have a temper tantrum if there's no chicken wings. That makes the t-shirt funny, especially if grandma really likes chicken wings. You're like, oh, here, Granny, I got you a shirt. And she goes, oh my goodness, this is kind of naughty. It makes me look like a bit of a diva, but it's not necessarily rude in that regard. Okay, so I really hope you found this podcast helpful. There's some ideas here. There's lots of different reasons things are funny. So you don't have to, tackle them all. But if you're interested in finding out what's funny in your life, take a look through Google funny t-shirts, but then run it through the filters that I've talked about in this podcast. Go, oh, it's funny because of the shared experience. Oh, it's funny because it's inappropriate. Oh, it's funny because it's a play on words. Oh, it's funny because it's a rhythm of three. Whatever it may be, that's the reason it's funny to at least some people. Make sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you've got a question or a comment, by all means, please do throw it down there. I'd love to hear from you. And have a great one. I believe in you, and I know that we all have some funny designs inside of us. So go forth and conquer.